Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a brand new video. My name is Arfat, and today I will be presenting you a comparison of the birth narrative of Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew and Luke, as well as I'll be pointing out to you the difference between the New King James Bible, which I have here, the NKJV, and also with the NRSV when it comes to a passage in the Gospel of Matthew about the wise men coming from the east, and then they saw Jesus. Did the wise men actually pay Jesus homage? Okay, did they pay him homage, or did they actually worship him? Okay, and I'll go through with you some of the reasons as to why I believe the New King James version, okay, which I have here, okay, have the translation is wrong. And I'll not be discussing about the Greek, so on and so forth. Instead, I'll take this discussion to a more towards a logical sense, okay, because not everyone knows Greek, and I don't know a lot of Greek either to be able to take on board this topic. And so my explanation as to why I believe that the wise men actually paid Jesus homage instead of worshiping him, and why wise men don't worship Jesus, because that will be illogical. We will get through all of this discussion. So firstly, I'll do a comparison between Matthew and Luke when it comes to the birth narrative. A lot of Christians today, when they read the New Testament, they will not, unless someone pointed out to them the difference between the birth narrative of Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew and in Luke, majority of the time they will just read it as if there's nothing wrong with the passage. But in fact, if you actually read it slowly and carefully and actually observe what you read, which most people actually do not, most people do not actually observe what they read. And so if they actually observe what they are reading, okay, or observe what people are actually reading to them, then they'll understand that there is a lot of problem when it comes to the birth narrative of Matthew and Luke, the only two birth narrative that we have about Jesus. Okay, not even Paul mentioned about Jesus' virgin birth. Okay, so if you want to know the birth narrative about Jesus, there's only two places that you go to, okay, and that is Matthew and Luke. So we'll take a look at Matthew first, because Matthew appears first in the New Testament order. Okay, order of the New Testament is Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, who came first before Luke. Now, Jesus is already in Bethlehem, okay, because that is the setting, the historical setting that we have. Jesus is already in Bethlehem. Joseph and Mary is with him in Bethlehem. The wise men from the east, possibly a magi, okay, they could be Zoroastrian from Syria, coming from the east towards Jerusalem to inquire about the Messiah, basically. And then Herod somehow is he's oblivious to this. He doesn't know the Messiah. Where will the Messiah be born? And so when he consulted his team, in a sense, okay, his team of rabbis, they informed him that Jesus will be born in Bethlehem. The Messiah will be born in Bethlehem. And so the wise man goes to Bethlehem. Apparently, they have been following the stars, okay, from Syria, possibly from the east. Okay, these magi, they have been following the stars from the east, and then when they landed when the stars actually stopped in a particular house, okay, and that is an indication whereby that is the house of Jesus, the Messiah. First things first, there's many problems to this story. A lot of historians believe that this story is not historical at all, because how could you follow the stars? It doesn't make sense, okay? Now, there are a couple of reasons we can somehow counter this argument. Now I'm presenting both sides here of the argument. Okay, I'm not taking any sides. I'm neutral in this in this discussion. Um, there are some arguments out there saying whereby it is not a literal following of the stars. It is basically like how people navigate through the ocean, okay, by looking at the stars. They know the direction based on the stars, and so that could be one possible reason as well. Okay? And I'm not saying that this reason is bogus. Okay, in fact, it could be a legitimate reason. But the more popular opinion was that the stars actually lead, the stars follow or guided the Magi. Okay, um, but more discussion needs to be put into this topic here. Okay, this pericope about the Magi following the stars, or the stars leading the wise men from the east. Okay, the second problem that I have, okay, or that scholars have pointed out, was that why would a magi or wise man from the east goes to Jerusalem to inquire about the Messiah and then ended up worshipping the Messiah? Wise men from the east, presumably Zoroastrians or pagans or whatever they are, okay, they have nothing to do with Judaism. And so the story whereby this wise man coming from the east and then worshiping Jesus, it doesn't make sense actually. And so a lot of historians do not take this as something that is historical. There are a couple of reasons why this story, if it is not historical, okay, there are a couple of reasons why this story is actually included. The author of the Gospel of Matthew actually decided to include, because bear in mind that this is happening, okay, in the very beginning of the Gospel of Matthew. And if we look at the very last chapter of the Gospel of Matthew, okay, whereby the Jews actually rejected Jesus, and now the message, okay, has been opened up to the pagans, the Gentiles, basically. And so somehow a lot of scholars sees this as Matthew is actually revealing that since Jews rejected the Messiah, now the message is to be carried out to the Gentiles. Okay. There are a couple of strong opinions, okay, why this is so. Matthew is the most Jewish gospel, okay, but in the most Jewish gospels that we have, okay, we even have, because if the gospel is Jewish, the original thinking was that, okay, it is meant for the Jews, okay. But in Matthew, we have Jesus criticizing the Jews. The most Jewish gospel have actually a portion in it whereby it indicates that the message is no longer to the Jews, because the Jews have rejected the message. And so now the message of Jesus is actually opening up to the Gentiles. Okay? And a lot of scholars believe that this is actually something historical, because if Matthew is a Jew, okay, writing for his Jewish community, and in Matthew's gospel, in it contains criticism of the Jews, okay, it is something that is very likely to actually be historical, because why would you criticize your own people? Okay, that is the thinking, the logical thinking of scholars. And so a lot of scholars believe and are somewhat perplexed by this, not all of them. Now we do have an answer to this. Well, presumably we do have an answer. Scholars have came up with many different theories and hypotheses over these centuries, but in recent times, this argument is actually quite convincing. Okay, because why would a Jewish community, actually speak against his own community? Okay, and so Matthew's community, the Matthean community, could possibly be a community that believe in Jesus. Okay, they could be Jewish community that actually believe in Jesus, and they are surrounded by the scribes and the Pharisees and the Sadducees, who in the Gospel of Matthew itself seems to have been, not all, but majority of them seems to be opposing Jesus. And possibly they are opposing the Matthean Jewish community who believe in Jesus as well. Okay. And so this is something that I believe is actually historical. Okay. The message of Jesus was intended for the Jews, but because the Jews actually rejected the message of Jesus, okay, and now Christianity has superseded Judaism, and also now the message has opened up to the Gentiles. Okay, and this is something that I believe is historical. When it comes to the Magi actually following the stars, that is something that I believe not historical. But we have to understand the gospel is actually not a historical account. It is a theological account. But how do we portray, how the gospel authors actually portray a theological conclusion is via what we call today historical means. Okay, so in a nutshell, they use historical narrative to actually conclude a theological argument. And so that is how I see the Gospels to be written, because technically speaking, depending on which side you take, it doesn't make sense actually for a pagan or Zoroaster to actually worship or to pay Jesus homage, because it has nothing to do with them. It's just as saying that a Hindu, okay, actually worship Jesus. Why would a Hindu worship Jesus? Okay, Hinduism doesn't have anything to do with Jesus. Okay, and so the story of the wise men coming from the east to worship Jesus or pay him homage, it doesn't make sense to me. Okay, now while we're at the topic of whether did the wise man actually pay Jesus homage or did he actually worship Jesus, according to the New King James Version, okay, the wise men worship Jesus. Okay, a bit here. But according to the NRSV, which I also have it here, okay, the NRSV, and this is the New Testament, okay, and other early Christian writings, they pay him homage. Now, which one is the more plausible renderings? Okay, the NRSV is the more plausible renderings because it is the gold standard. It is produced by a team of scholars led by Bruce Metzger, the late Bruce Metzger, okay, the scholar, okay, of Christianity, of the New Testament actually. And so the New King James Version is filled with theological assertions in it, okay, to be honest with you. It is not academic. It is sometimes, not every time, rejected in an academic settings, because a lot of the translation here is actually has theological insertions or assertions in here. And so my opinion is that wise man doesn't worship Jesus. Okay, possibly they could have paid Jesus homage, but in the first place we have to question why would they even want to find Jesus. Okay, why? If they're magi, they could be prophets even. Okay, but at the end of the day, it just doesn't make sense, because Zoroastrians have nothing to do with Judaism. We have to remember that Jesus is actually a Jew. Okay, according to the historical accounts, Jesus was a Jew living in Bethlehem, and then the wise men came and tried to pay him homage. Jesus hasn't even done anything. Okay, he was still a baby. He was still an infant. And so yeah, that is the problem that I have, okay, and a lot of scholars have with the Matthean account of the birth narrative. Now, if we go to the Lucan account, it is a completely different story. Okay, Now I'm only focusing on I know that they flee to Egypt and then they come back and then they settle in Nazareth. Okay, but we can take that discussion, the second part of the birth narrative in Matthew, in a different video. In Luke, okay, Luke has a completely different story. Okay? Jesus wasn't from Bethlehem to begin with. Okay, the story was that Jesus is not in Bethlehem, but he went to Bethlehem because Joseph apparently have to pay some tax, okay, because of a census, and so that is the reason why they go to Bethlehem. Presumably they're already from Nazareth or somewhere in Galilee, okay, presumably, okay. Because we do have the story of Zechariah and so on and so forth, okay, of John the Baptist and Elizabeth, but we do not want to get into that because I just want to get into the pericope, okay, that section whereby quite parallel to the Gospel of Matthew, but not really, okay, parallel in the sense whereby it really describes the birth, but it is a completely different account. Now, in Luke, there is no such thing as the Magi, okay? There's no such thing as the wise men from the east paying him homage or worshipping him, depending on which translation you use. But that doesn't mean that it needs to be parallel with Matthew, okay? Because Luke is writing his own gospel, and Matthew is writing his own gospel. Okay, I'm using the word his, the pronoun his, because presumably they're all male. Okay, but I don't believe that Matthew wrote Matthew and Luke wrote Luke. Okay, I believe that the Gospels were written anonymously. They were written and edited, redacted many times. Okay, before we have them, but that is a different discussion. And so Luke portrays Jesus as having born in Bethlehem because Mary and Joseph had to travel to Bethlehem to pay a tax, for example. Okay, a tax that leads back to 1,000 years ago because they have to travel back to their ancestral home of David. Okay, because Joseph was from the lineage of David. Okay, and so from here we have a different account. Okay, we have a different account. A lot of people have been trying to marry the two accounts together by saying that the Lucan account actually appears first and then the Matthean account appears next. Okay, because the Matthean account is a continuation of the Lucan account. It has been argued this way by some people. But if you really look at it, if you read it carefully, it describes the birth of Jesus, okay, in a different way. And so these two accounts cannot be married together. They're contradictory to one another. Okay, they're speaking completely different things. And if you marry these two accounts together, it means that you are creating your own gospel. Okay, because none of the gospel authors actually, portrays Jesus to be born with a combination of the narrative between Matthew and Luke together. Now, the Gospels have been read this way and have been told by the church fathers this way, and even to today in the churches. People combine these two accounts together and then they're actually producing their own Gospels. And I believe that it's not a genuine, okay, that is not a genuine way to read the Gospel. You have to read the Gospel and you cannot reject the historical background behind it. Okay? A theological reading is good, okay, but you also need a historical reading and understanding of it as well, because the Gospel is actually not a theological book only. It is also a historical book. Whether some of the history in it is bogus or it actually happened, okay, that is a different question. But the Gospels were actually written, okay, in part historical and part theological way. And so we have to accept both of them. We have to read the Gospels in both a theological understanding as well as a historical understanding as well. So we cannot reject, because they both actually works well together, and you need both of them, okay, theology and history. And which is also why my channel is called History and Theology. Now, are the Lucan accounts historical? My understanding is that, and my opinion and conclusion is that it is not historical. Okay, the earlier part about Elizabeth, so on and so forth, we can discuss that. Okay, but basically this pericope whereby Jesus was born in Bethlehem because Joseph had to go back to his ancestral home of David about 1,000 years ago. I don't think this is historical. Where would you go 1,000 years ago if you have to go and pay a tax? You wouldn't even know. Okay? And also the reason why that this is not historical, because there's no such census ever mentioned in the Roman writings. Not even a single one. None of the Roman historian actually mention it. Okay? None of it. And so we do not have any independent sources outside of Christian literature that actually confirms the census. Now, does this mean that it actually does not happen? Okay, obviously not. It could have happened. There are many things that happen, okay, that are not documented independently of a particular literature. In this case, Christianity. But is it likely that it happened? It is very unlikely, okay, because the story itself actually doesn't make sense. 1,000 years ago, okay, and even if you go further, you read further, Jesus wasn't even from the lineage of David. Okay, it was Joseph. And so even if you look at Matthew, this is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David. Okay, the son of David, it again, I do not want to drag this discussion, this video is already too long, but yeah, so the Lucan account it is not historical as well, especially for that pericope. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and although it is slightly confusing, it is academically somehow I approach this from an academic manner. But I'd like to give you a tidbits, or not a tidbits, actually, to share with you about the Islamic narrative about Jesus. The Islamic narrative about Jesus is actually, I've made a video about this, and you can check out my video, but it is actually quite similar to Luke, especially the earlier accounts of Luke, okay, describing Zechariah, John the Baptist, Elizabeth, so on and so forth. It is actually quite similar to the Quran. And so my personal opinion was that I'm going more towards the Lucan birth narrative of Jesus, okay, because that is closer to the Quran, because I'm a Muslim, and that is closer to my theology. And I believe that the Matthew's account is actually bogus amongst the two accounts, Luke and Matthew. Luke actually has a stronger plausibility when it comes as far as historical context is concerned, because the earlier accounts of Luke actually looks possible. Okay, now again, if you really accept if you accept prophecy, okay, then you have no problem accepting the birth narrative of Jesus, that he was born of a virgin. But a lot of hardcore historians who reject prophecy will not take this opinion at all. Okay, they believe that no human being can actually born of a virgin. Okay, and so these historians are leading more towards the atheist side. Okay, and so my next video will be about the discussion between religion and atheism. and I hope you enjoy the next discussion. So see you on my next video. My name is Arfat, and thank you for watching.